Well, hey everyone, welcome to another Southern Indiana sawmill video. In this video I want to talk about doing a portable sawmill job. And this is for two reasons. One is for those of you who might have a sawmill and you are thinking about getting into the portable sawmill business. The other is actually for the customers, the people that might be looking at what they can expect from a very first sawmill job. Now there are a lot more people, especially in the last year or two, that are trying to get into the sawmill business. Some people are doing it as more of a hobby, and some people are actually looking at it as more of a profession, a new type of lifestyle, if you will. Now, believe it or not, even though there are a lot of portable sawmills being sold right now, there are actually very, very few people who are actually going out and doing portable jobs. And the reason for that is because it's so much easier to saw at home and to not have to move your sawmill, not have to worry about the liability of bringing expensive equipment all over God's green earth. But for those of you that are looking to do portable, here are some questions that you're going to want to ask. I've got nearly a dozen of these. I think I have about 11, and we'll see what we add on as we go on. So without further ado, let's get started. So there are some things obviously I wouldn't have to tell you about running a good business, like politeness and kindness. But believe it or not, a lot of people I've seen, even though there are so many wonderful people in the sawmill business, which is one of the reasons that motivated me to get into it, was just the camaraderie among others. There are a lot of people that for some reason or another, they carry a chip on their shoulder, they're a little rude, and they aren't polite. And it's amazing what just kindness does to help open doors for you and your work. So one of the first questions you're really going to want to ask a customer is, what size logs? How many logs? What is the length? What is the species? These are very important questions, and probably the very first thing that you want to ask as far as doing the actual job. Now once you know diameter, length, species, and how many, that is really going to help you immediately begin to understand what this job is going to look like, what a workday is going to look like out in the field. Now one of the things that you want to know along with that information is you want to tell the customer the size and capacity of your machine. Now my Wood-Mizer in particular can do a 36-inch log and comfortably about 20 foot long, and so that's a pretty good size log, and they will need to know that up front, because I can tell you I've gotten a lot of customers that call me and the very first thing they say is, well, I got kind of a large log, and then you ask them how big and they say like 46 inches across. And then that leads to like a whole nother conversation. And so you want to let them know what size you can do, and if you're willing to do something bigger and do a lot of work, of course you've seen me do some videos like that where I've gotten a little in over my head at times, just let them know ahead of time what kind of work is going to be involved in doing that. Another question you want to ask the customer, along with what size the logs are and the capabilities of your machine, is how exactly they want to cut this lumber. Now believe it or not, I've had a lot of customers contact me and they have no idea how they want this stuff cut. You know, most people are not familiar with the nomenclature of the sawmill or lumber business. So when you start saying 4/4, 8/4, stuff like that, they have no idea what you're talking about. And so if you get the feeling that that's the case, just use normal language, 1 inch, 2 inch, 1.5 inches, and make it really easy that way on the customer. Now, if a customer has a 30-inch log and they want it all cut 1 inch, obviously that's going to take twice as long as cutting something 2 inch. And so as you're planning your day out in your head and you're thinking about what kind of job you have ahead of you, you want to make sure that you kind of know ahead of time what you're getting into. Now, if they have no idea at all what they want cut, then ask them this simple question: what is the end goal, or what is the final purpose of this lumber going to be? Is it siding for a barn? Is it flooring in a house? Is it going to be for a table or furniture in the future? And then you can help them along with that, and that can be kind of fun because you can kind of help them design as they go and be a part of that process. But that's one thing you want to do, is to know how thick are you cutting the material. Okay, I'm not keeping super track of how many points I have here, but I think this is point 4, and this is really a biggie because this can be a deal maker or a deal breaker as far as a sawmill job is concerned, and that is, how are you moving the logs around? You know, a lot of times you get logs that are large, they are very difficult to move because they weigh literally a ton. And so if they don't have a tractor or a skid steer, in some cases a log arch is helpful. Now again, everyone has their own setup, and for me, I have a small log arch that I will use occasionally to pull logs around, and I I've used customers' ATVs for that. I've used my own truck for that. Sometimes we've even just done it by hand if they're a little bit smaller. But a lot of people don't have skid steers and tractors and log arches and all that. You might have a skid steer that you can bring in the job with you. If you do, then you're balling, and I don't know why you're watching this video, because you already have the equipment and already probably have a pretty good idea. But if it's a big job and you know that there's going to be a lot of logistics and moving stuff around, you definitely want to make sure that there is a skid steer or a tractor or something equivalent to get the logs moved around. Sometimes you can spend as much time as cutting as you do just moving the logs around, and that can turn a 4-hour day into an 8-hour day pretty fast. And so how are the logs getting moved around? Now, one thing I will say is that I have done jobs where there is no equipment to move stuff around, but I've done them anyhow because the customer already had an ideal spot set out, the logs were already stacked up nice, and we could literally just roll them right onto the hydraulics of the machine and pick it up and go. If that's the case, then that's kind of ideal, but that's normally not the case. Okay, so there's kind of a fifth thing now that you want to start thinking about, now that you know the size of the logs and kind of what the day could start to be looking like. And that is, can you actually physically set up the machine in the location that it needs to be? So one of the main questions that I ask right off the bat is your ground relatively flat? Now, if you're like in Illinois or Iowa or something like that, Kansas, of course the ground is probably going to be flat. But here in southern Indiana, there is no such thing as flat land. A lot of people, when they hear Indiana, they think, oh, it's super flat, and they think of that middle area of the state. But here in southern Indiana, it is very, very hilly. There's a lot of haulers, and there's a lot of very windy back roads and stuff like that. And so ideally what you want is nice flat ground, and of course there's a lot of reasons for that. If you're not on relatively flat ground, your loading arms can be weird, and all sorts of bad things can happen when you try to load logs. And never ever set up on the side of a hill. You've got a machine that weighs almost 4,000 pounds, and then you put a couple 1,000-pound log on there. You know, what could go wrong, right? And so one thing that I always look for is relatively flat ground, and kind of what I tell people to anticipate is try to prepare for as if a semi was coming into your property. Now, between the truck and the trailer and the turning radius, that's about what you got. And so you can back up, you can pull out and all that kind of stuff, but you want to make sure that you're in a situation where you can actually get the mill, and that the mill, of course, is set up near where the logs are going to be as well, unless they have a skid steer or a tractor or something like that to move along. So that would be kind of like a fifth thing. All right, now as you're working during the day, the second you make your first cut and you start cutting your first boards, you're going to start asking yourself, who in the world is here to take all these scraps and to stack all these boards? Now, are you going to be the one doing all that, or is most of your time going to be on the saw? Now, I'll tell you what, when I started out, I did just about everything myself. And boy, I can tell you, that wore me down in a hurry. You know, usually in portable jobs, there is not the equipment to help you move stuff around, and so you end up being the equipment. And that can really wear you out in a hurry. And so nowadays when I do a job, I say that there needs to be at least a minimum of 3 people on board, unless it's a really, really easy job. And so what you would have is 1 person cutting and 2 people available to stack boards and off-bear the cutoffs. Now that makes for a really smooth day. And one thing I will say is that you want all 3 of those people to be able-bodied individuals. I know that might seem like common sense, but you know, again, I've seen a lot of things over the years, and sometimes people, you know, want to help, but maybe it's better if they have someone that is a little more able-bodied to do it. And so it's a realistic conversation. I think there's a way to have those conversations without offending anyone and their capabilities. But once you get on the job, you know, it kind of speaks for itself if people are up for the task or not. I've done jobs where we have 50 or 60 logs. It turns into a couple-day job, and then I end up bearing most of the brunt for that. And the amount that you wear yourself out, or willing to wear yourself out, does have its consequences over time. And some of you more old-timer guys that have been doing this a lot longer than I have can probably attest to that. One of the things that people don't often think about when they are stacking lumber is the fact that you need to start air drying this lumber as fast as possible. You don't want to just take the boards off the mill and then stack them all together without any airflow. And so this leads to a conversation with your customer about stickers. Now, what are stickers? Well, thank you for asking. This here is a sticker, and this is a pretty simple one. This is a dried poplar sticker, And basically you just put them on top of your boards that are nice and flat, and this is thick enough to allow airflow to go through. Stickers can range anywhere from ½ an inch, I would say, all the way up to about 3/4 of an inch or even an inch thick. I typically cut my stickers about ½ an inch thick, and I find that that gives sufficient airflow through the lumber. If you're going to have a lot of weight bearing on them, you might want to cut them a little thicker than that. But you will probably never hear a customer say, "Oh yeah, I've got stickers and I'm ready to go." So normally you're going to cut those on site. Now, the very, very best stickers are kiln dried and they have airflow built into them, and there's fancy stickers that are made for all this for the professional business. And one of the things you want to avoid is sticker stain, which often happens with green wood. What happens is you have a piece of green wood going this way and then you have your lumber going this way, and as it starts to dry out, all the minerals and stuff will come out of that material and you can actually stain the wood cross grain. Now, I found that if you stick with the same species, that's much less of a problem. But you definitely wouldn't want to take, for example, a green piece of walnut and put it on a piece of poplar or pine or something like that. That is guaranteed to sticker stain every single time. So try to keep your species together. And generally speaking, if you're going to cut those on site, find a small waste log, something 10 inches or maybe a little bit larger, where you can cut a bunch and just stack them and cut them all at one time. Or, you know, if you want to, obviously you could cut those far ahead of time and bring them to the customer. In which case you might want to charge a little something extra if you go out of your way to do something like that. Alright, so I'm not exactly keeping track, but I have a little sheet prepared to help me sort of get through this, and this would be number 8. As you go along the conversation, eventually at some point most customers are going to ask, how long is this going to take? And here's what I say, and you might be shocked to hear this, but do not ever give an exact time that you think you can get everything cut. And the main reason for this is because there are so many variables in sawmilling, and especially on a portable job where all sorts of things can happen that right now perhaps your mind can't even comprehend, that can either set you behind or sometimes pleasantly might even set you forward. You know, you might get into a nice poplar job or pine or cedar and you can really fly through that stuff. But you might get the 36-inch hickory log with a bunch of metal in it. And if the customer is willing to keep paying for the blades, that's what I do. I charge for blades if I hit metal because it wrecks them and you can't resharp them. But if they're willing to keep paying for you to hit metal, you know, that log could take you an hour and a half to cut something like that, you know. And so I never give time expectations. Now, if you must, if they're really asking you what you think it's going to take to cut everything, I give them a low number, and then I give them like a ridiculously high number. So I say, for example, well, you've got 5 logs and they're all 30-inch hickories, right? And I tell them on the low end that might be 2.5 to 3 hours, but I could be there all day depending what we hit. And that's going to roll right into my 9th point, which is to under-promise, over-deliver. I never ever will tell somebody, oh, this is a simple job, this is only going to take a couple hours. I always say, well, let's see what we get into. You know, realistically, I've done jobs like this before. If everything goes smoothly, it will be between this time and that time. And then you work with that. But you will never go wrong saying, oh, this might take 8 hours, and then you end up getting it done in 4. I've never heard anyone complain for spending less money and taking less time. And so always under-promise, over-deliver with all of your expectations. Point number 10 is something you might want to consider, and something as a customer you should expect, and that is to have a disclaimer form for the sawmilling process. Now, I have a business tax ID, which means I have a certain liability with the business, which means I have insurance and all of that, and there's a certain risk with me taking my machinery out on the job. And because I'm sitting there on site, and there's a lot of things that could go wrong, I have a disclaimer form, and it's a very, very simple form. It's stated in very plain language that I have the customer sign and agree to before I get there. Basically, it's that they get to keep all the scraps and sawdust. If I hurt myself, it's not their fault. If they hurt themselves, it's not my fault. And it's basically something like that. And I've had this form for since day one that I've been doing my business, and I've never had a single bad incident. And I've been portable sawmilling for a little over 6 years now. And so make sure that you have a disclaimer form, get an email address, or if you're fancy and you can text it to them and they can sign it or whatever on their phone, and that's another way to do that. But make sure that you have a disclaimer form, because you just never ever know what could happen down the road. Okay, the last thing that I want to say about an initial conversation with someone to set up a sawmill job is this: try to nail down a date that you can go out and do the job on that first phone call. You know, people have a tendency to forget about you once the phone is hung up, and then they might never call you back. And so, in a non-pressure kind of a way, try to establish a date. Say, what is your timeline? When do you plan on getting this done? And then they might ask, what is your availability? And if you're a weekend warrior, you might say, well, my Saturdays are open, and here's my next available Saturday. And try to get a date nailed down right in that first phone call, if possible. If not possible, you know, if all their ducks aren't in a row and they've got it down a ways, then you want to at least call within the week to see where they're at and see a time expectation from them, again, in a low pressure type of way. Well guys, on a final word, this isn't a point, but just a final word, I want to tell you that portable sawmilling and sawmilling in general is a very, very rewarding profession to be in. You know, every time that you get into a log and you cut it open, nature reveals itself, this wonderful, beautiful creation that we've been given to work with, and you see things new all the time. And you will never cut two logs that are exactly the same. You will never run into two people that are exactly the same. And between the work you do and the people you meet, that is really what makes this entire job worth it. And remember folks, hard work does pay off. If you've seen my shirts, you've seen me wearing these, that is one of my slogans that I use all the time, is hard work pays off. So guys, don't give up hope. Keep working, keep striving for excellence, and do as good a work as you can possibly do. Hopefully this video has been helpful for you, and hopefully it's something that will encourage you, if you haven't already, to start doing more portable sawmill work. Now if you've made it this far in the video, congratulations. Like all YouTubers, I just want to ask you to consider subscribing to my channel, hitting the like button, hitting the bell to be notified of future videos that are coming out, and I would very much appreciate that. What do all those things do? Well, they help me get noticed in the algorithm and sort of pushed up and getting recommended and views on YouTube. And so if you would do those things, I'd really appreciate it. And guys, I want to thank you all for watching. God bless you all. Take care.